Hi there, and welcome to another SketchUp tutorial video. In this video, I want to show you how you can use SketchUp for construction site layout. Everything from getting the terrain into SketchUp to a rough building model to setting up crane locations and fences, etc., etc. All right, so let's get started. What we first need is, of course, the site, and I am just going to pick a generic site. But obviously you will need to know where your construction site is. And I'm going to use SketchUp's geolocation or add location feature to do this. By the way, most of what I'm showing you works in the web version of SketchUp as well. I'm showing you in the SketchUp Pro version, the installed version, but for the most part, all of this will work in the web version as well. Okay, so first of all, we need to find a location. I need to pick one that we may want to use. A parking lot is always a good idea as a default location. And I hope nobody is going to get angry for me picking that parking lot. But nevertheless, okay, so after selecting that I want to pick a location, SketchUp will ask me whether I want the regular quality terrain and satellite photography, which comes through Digital Globe, or whether I want to have a slightly better version, which is this near map data. That data will cost you at some point, but it comes in very high quality. So depending on whether this is a professional project or a study project, you may want to pick one or the other. Since mine is for study only, I'm going to just pick the default Digital Globe data. All right, so now we're going to need to kind of zoom in on our site. You can zoom the map using the zoom level in and out. You can use the mouse wheel, of course, as well, but at some point you just have to simply pick an outline. And then when everything looks good, you just simply click on import. And when you do that, your terrain and your outline and your satellite data comes right into SketchUp. So you see kind of the scale figure here. Everything is, of course, scaled properly. And again, because this is the free imagery, the quality isn't as great as what you get with the commercial imagery. But nevertheless, let me show you one more thing. With all of this, you get two things. You get a flat orthophoto, which is really useful, of course, for laying things out and organizing things, but not every terrain is flat. So in tags, under tags here on the right, you see that there's a second layer that came in too, which actually gives you the terrain data. Now I picked a fairly flat terrain, but you see that it rises up a little to the side and drops off a little to this side. So if you have more sculpted terrain, a hillside or anything like that, you will notice the difference. And you saw me turning basically various tags on and off. There are these two tags, and I'm just clicking the little I button to turn them on and off. So what I usually like to do is to start off with a flat terrain, or basically just the photo, not the terrain at all, because then I can arrange things. Unless the vertical dimension is really crucial, that's a really good starting point. And you can always start that way and then, of course, adjust for vertical and sloping terrains, etc., etc. Okay, so now we've got this thing geolocated. We've got the terrain photo in there, and now we need to at least roughly get our building in there. And typically at this point, you will, of course, have some plans to work off. I'm going to pick a plan of our office. And I basically just did a screenshot out of a PDF plan set. Depending on the level of detail you need, that might just be enough. You may need more detail, and you can actually import, DWG lines, etc., etc. But this is really great for just a quick and dirty first approach, of course. So here's my screenshot as a JPEG. I'm just going to drag it right into SketchUp, and I'll place it somewhere over there. There's of course different ways you can do that. You can also go to File, Import, and then import an image and place it as an object, just like what I just did right there. It doesn't come in overly scaled, but we'll fix that in a second. but that's how you get your plan in there. And it also may or may not be north oriented. So in my case here, this plan is oriented building north as opposed to, or project north as opposed to true north, which of course my orthophoto is oriented as. So the green axis right here, that is north. And if my plan had been oriented true north, then of course I wouldn't have to turn it at some point. So keep that in mind, that you may have a difference there. Okay, so now let's get this scaled. When a photo comes in this way, when you drag it in, it comes in as an object. And what I like to do is to group it so that I can scale it within the group without affecting the rest of the model. That's a really nice and easy way to do the scaling part. In order to do that, make sure it's somewhere off to the side like what I did and doesn't overlap anything else. Then you right-click on what you just pulled in. Click on Explode, at which point SketchUp will basically create a rectangle and add the image as a texture to the rectangle. You didn't see anything change, but that's what happened in the background. Now I'm going to triple click it. Didn't really have to do it, but just to be safe, I basically have to select the whole thing and I need to group it again. So right click on it, make group, and now it's a group. And you can see up here under entity info, obviously that's a group now. I'm going to clean this up a little bit here. All right, so now let's scale this. And I'm going to do that within the group. So I'm going to double click on that image that I just pulled in. And I'm going to need some kind of a scale reference. So my scale reference is the dimension between this column line and that column line. But yours may be different. So pick and choose whatever makes sense for you. But I looked it up in the plan. This is 26 feet, even though you can't read it right here. And again, we don't need that much detailed because this is really just a preliminary process. Okay, so remember, you have to be inside the group, otherwise you're scaling the whole model. So within the group, you start the tape measure tool, and then you click one end of the dimension that you know, and then you click the other end, right there, close enough. And then without doing anything else, you type in that exact dimension. You'll see it on the bottom right on my screen. It says length 26 feet, and I'm going to hit enter. And by doing that, SketchUp will basically scale the context. And the context of this is within the group. So it says, do you want to resize the active group or component? I'm going to just say yes. There you go. And now, I mean, if you want to, you can double check things. But now with the tape measure, I should be roughly at 26 feet right there. And again, you know, depending on your project, this may be the precision you need, or you may need more precision. But again, for a rough site layout, that's a really good start. Okay, so now we've got that sorted. Now I want to trace the floor plan and extrude it so that I have my rough outline. Obviously, not all buildings are just straight extrusions. This one definitely is not. But I'm just going to assume it for now, and that may be good enough for site planning, but you may need to do a little bit more intricate planning later. But all I need to do right now is just to draw on top of this using the line tool. So I'm going to start right here, go over there, and you know, you can make this as precise or as rough as you need for your project. So I'm going to go here, there. Actually, I'm going to go a little faster just for the sake of getting this done. And now I'm going to move over there, and I'm going to reference that point, and then I'm going to close up there. There's always something. All right. So something snapped funky. There's that. And then I'm going to do it back here. All right, now I'm just going to clean up the mess that I made right there. Ultimately, you know, if you had drawn this better, and I did it slightly in perspective, if you had switched to top view, then there would have been a better chance actually that everything aligned nicely. But even then, it may get funky. But in any case, so now I've outlined the building on my plan. And remember that the plan is one object, or a group basically. And now my building outline here is a second object, and because that is drawn right on top of the other face, I get this what's called Z-fighting. It's basically this flickering. But we're going to get rid of that in a second. So now let's extrude this building, and we're going to give it a few floors. I'm just simply going to use the push-pull tool for that, just like this here. And I know that my first floor is 19 feet. So I'm going to type in 19 feet. I'm going to do the second floor, but before I do the second floor, I'm just going to quickly hit the control key so that I actually get a surface there. And I am extruding a second copy of that surface, basically. So now, next floor is 14 feet. So I'm typing that in. Again, because I had the control key, I get this little plus icon. So I'm getting another surface there. So I'm going to do 14 feet again. And I'm just going to do another floor, 14 feet, just like that. All right, so now what I have is my extruded building shape, and I have these floors. And the floors, again, just came in because for the push-pull tool, I tapped copy so that I get that face. Now I'm going to triple-click this whole thing because I drew it on top of a group. It's completely separate, and I can right click and I can group this thing. And now I have myself a really nice rough building outline. You can double check this with X-ray view right there, where now you see all the floor plates and the building shape being there. And again, you know, depending on your 3D or the Z direction, basically the up direction, you may need to have a different approach for yours. But again, this might just be enough for what it is we're doing. Okay, so now I'm going to move this onto the new site. And depending on what your project does, you may need to rotate it a little bit or whatever, you know, pick and choose. So something like this. Let's assume that's our building in situ. All right, and remember I'm doing this in 2D on the flat photo, but if you wanted to place this in 3D, you can do that, of course, by simply turning the two tags on and off. But then, of course, you'll have the vertical component of cutting into ground, etc., etc. But again, this is just preliminary, so I'm good enough with 2D. Okay, so there's that. Now let me move the picture out of the way. I don't really need that. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to need to add the common things that you would need on a construction site. So we're going to need to place a trailer somewhere. We need to come up with some kind of a fence line, maybe the traffic flow through the site, and so on and so forth. And then we're going to need to figure out crane locations. And for all of that, there are some really nice shortcuts. And again, you may need to do this more detailed or less detailed, completely up to you. But I'll show you one way to doing this. Okay, so first of all, common site equipment. I'm going to go to the 3D warehouse. And thankfully, there is some stuff in there that I can use. So I'm going to be very thankful to Ben for putting Turner's logistics models in there. And you can search for this by just saying Turner construction. I think it comes up. I'm not going to do it right now, but it's fairly easy to get to. But there are other libraries in the 3D warehouse, and feel free to use any of them. Always double check the quality of what comes in, you know, that it's actually the size that you think it is, especially if you're in a different unit system. Some of them may be created in the metric system, some may use feet, etc., etc. So make sure you get that all right. But what we can do now is we can go, kind of look through this thing. Hey, we need a trailer. All right, so I'm going to download the trailer right into my model. And I'll place it right here. Right there. And now, of course, you can use the original photo, the ortho photo, to roughly place things, and that might just be good enough for what it is you need to do. Let's assume, for example, that we need to stay away from this road here, and we're going to most probably put a construction fence along that. But other than that, we're going to be able to use everything that's behind. So completely up to you. However this works is depending on your project, obviously. Then there's a bunch of traffic control things in there. There's a construction fence. Let's pop that in. I'm just going to pull one in and place it, and then ultimately you'll make copies as needed. You can regroup these, make a new group out of it. You can I'm trying to catch that. No, it doesn't want to. but basically you can I'm trying to, there it is. There we go. Okay, here we go. Because in the move tool, you get these little tick marks to align things. Still badly aligned, but you get the point. You can just arrange that any which way you want. There are traffic cones in there. There's all kinds of stuff that you may need. There we go. Got a traffic cylinder right there. Pop one here. And then, of course, you can make multiple copies. If you have SketchUp 22, it's part of the copy tool. I'm just going to use my plugin to just place a bunch of those. It's most probably not how you would do this, but nevertheless, completely up to you. All right, so you can do that now and get that outlined. Next, you may want to draw perimeters, etc. And this is where it gets a little tricky, because if you want to draw perimeters or highlight things, then you're most probably drawing onto the surface. So let's see if I just wanted to highlight something right there, for example, and I might just want to label it something, and maybe I want to give it a, let's give it a material right there. I'm just going to give it some material. Anyways, so just for diagrammatic purposes, I want to have something there. But you see, whenever you draw one face on top of another face, you get the Z fighting, and that never looks good. So different ways to deal with that. One is give it a slight thickness right there. That way it remains diagrammatic. It's just highlighting something, but you don't get Z fighting. You actually do get a little thickness. And if something, if you need to block something out in terms of space, as in this volume here needs to be free of anything else or cranes or whatever, then of course you can use that. But for the most part, just a little thickness will do. And then of course you can triple click that, make it a group, and then you can move it, arrange it, rotate it, much easier, just like that. So that's, oopsie, I actually moved it up. That wasn't supposed to happen. But you can move it in plane and so on, much easier. Obviously, you can turn things into components too. If you do this quite frequently, then you may have certain sizes that you always work with, and then it makes sense to make a component. And when you make something a component, you can have it stick to a surface. That's a little too much to explain right now, but there's other videos on that, of course. Okay, so let's assume you have that. If you need arrows for traffic flow, etc., that is also in the 3D warehouse. Just type in arrows and you get yourself a few. There's some made by the SketchUp folks, and there's others. Just use whatever you need. Then in terms of labeling things, you can of course use SketchUp's text tool, and you can annotate using leader text, just like that. You can annotate using screen text, which then stays on the screen And you can also annotate using 3D text. That is now not a great font. I'm going to use this one. And well, this is going to be too small, but I'm just going to place it somewhere, and then of course you can scale it any which way you want. So there's that, and you can place 3D text on the ground or on objects, or standing up, however you need it. So that's really good for annotating things, and then you can use SketchUp's scenes for creating various views of things. I'm not going to cover the scenes right now. They're covered elsewhere. But what I want to show you now is crane locations and placing and deciding on how to use cranes on a site like this here. So I'm just going to get rid of my floating texts here because that'll be just distracting. And when you work with cranes, there's a good chance that you will have specs on a particular crane. And that's what I'm assuming we're going to use here. Sometimes you just need it very rough and not as specific as these specs, but completely up to you at what level of detail you want to do this. I'll show you one technique, and then you can, of course, modify that. All right, so I have a crane diagram that I got from some specs. It's as an image again. It's just a screenshot out of a PDF. And I'm going to pull that in just the same way I pulled in the floor plan earlier. Right there. So there's my crane, has a bunch of options and so on. And I won't go into the details on that one. But we're going to do the same thing with it that we did earlier with the floor plan. I'm just going to explode this thing. And I'm going to regroup it. Make group. Okay, so now I have this as a group with a texture applied, and the texture is, of course, the image that I pulled in. Now I got to go into the group. I'm just double-clicking it, and I'm within the group. You see the outline here. And I'm going to scale it again, and, nicely enough, there is a scale reference here. So I'm going to use my tape measure from the center line of rotation. And then you can pick anything. I wouldn't pick a dimension that's too small, but here my 100 feet, the number in brackets as feet, is good enough. So I'm going to type in 100 feet. You'll see it on the bottom right on my screen as a 100-foot number under area. And then if I hit enter, it asks me whether I want to scale it, and I'm going to say yes. And now this group is scaled and nothing else. You got to be really careful not to scale the whole model now. If you didn't group the image beforehand, you're going to be scaling the whole model and everything's going to be off. So double check things. And actually, it's a good practice to, whip out the tape measure and just double check things. Yeah, 100 feet is good. For your building, remember one main direction or length or whatever, and double check that. So can't be careful enough. Okay, so now what we're going to do with this here, well, I'm going to only use parts of this, and you may need to use it differently, but I'm going to cut off the bottom here so that basically my crane sits on the ground. So I'm going to use my move tool, and I'm just going to move that bottom line all the way till there. Okay. So now we've got that, and I'm going to go out, and I'm going to use the move tool again to rotate this. Because it's a group, I can easily rotate it and make sure, of course, that it says 90 degrees on the bottom right and the measurements right there. And then I'm going to pick this at that rotation point right there, and I'm going to place it right here. Okay, so now we've got a whole ton of information right here, which is great because it's scaled accurately and it's placed accurately. One thing I like to do with this is I like to go to materials though. Click on the little house so that I only have the materials that are in the model, and we're going to have to find the one material that we've used, and that's of course an image, so it may be a little small, but when I go down here you'll see it. Then go to edit, and crank the opacity down to something where you can still see it, but where it's nicely transparent. Right there. Okay, so now you can work with this any which way you want. So obviously you'll have, based on load rating and so on, you'll need to use a certain part of this graph here, but you get your locations right here. You can work with that. And then, of course, this overlapping is really useful because now, you can just move this thing around and check things. Another little detail for that you may want to consider is to add a circle or an extruded circle. So I'm going to be outside of my group right here. I'm going to hit C so that I can start a circle, and I'm going to pick my center point of rotation right there. And actually what I'm going to do is I'll hover over the ground first, hold shift so that it doesn't acquire any other orientation. And then I'm going to click right there. And let's assume, I don't know, I'm just going to pick one of these lines right there. Okay, so maybe that's the range that we want to work with. And again, you can do this many different ways. You can have this as a flat circle, or you can extrude this, for example, to the height of your building, and then you can also apply something transparent to it. You can use any color, or you can use one of the glass and transparent colors right there. Good. So now I'm going to triple click the extrusion that I just created, and I'm going to make a group. And of course, I want to combine that with the diagram, and I'm going to make a new group. And then, of course, you can just go ahead and place that. See that I'm still good here. And now, because you have so many surfaces, it may make sense to go into X-ray mode and align things that way, but you can, of course, use any technique you like. And then again, the neat thing about this approach is now you have a reach and a range that you can create as overlapping circles, multiple locations and so on and so forth, and you can work with that. And I do get some Z fighting, so I'm gonna just go in here, extrude that a little up, and now that looks much better. So there's my assumed crane range. So that's another way you can plan site logistics very quickly, actually. And then, of course, how you can document it. And you can do this documentation in 3D, or you can create a few top and front views. Obviously, if you have a top view, you may want to switch camera to parallel perspective, and then you can show overlapping circles, etc., etc. Any of the information that you need can be in there. Then, of course, you can hide and show things in your graphs. So those are some tips and tricks for construction site logistics, layout, anything from your 3D objects to crane locations to obviously the building. If you need to do excavation planning, that of course requires a little bit more, but you can actually push down on this too. I may make another video on that one. So there's quite a bit of useful diagrammatic work that you can do right here, right in SketchUp in 3D. And most of that, like I said earlier, if your site is flat enough, then you can do that with a 2D site. But if you absolutely need the third dimension, if it's more crucial than what I have here, then of course you can add that too. Comes right in and is right in your SketchUp model. All right, so I hope those were some useful techniques, and feel free to leave a comment, and feel free to use this, of course, in your projects. And I hope you have many successful construction sites based on this. All right, enjoy.